Cairngorm is the most selfless gem in Hoseki no Kuni. Transcendence is a concept talked often in association with Buddhism and is defined as the overcoming of limits of an individual self and its desires in spiritual contemplation and realization. So in layman's terms, it's essentially rising above oneself and connecting to something that's greater than yourself. It's interesting though that this act of transcendence, which can be viewed as the most altruistic act possible, is questioned within Hoseki no Kuni. Ghost was a passive observer that self-compartmentalized their mistakes and suffering onto the black luster that questioned and challenged every action that Ghost took. The Cairngorm that was inside of Ghost was never able to fully develop as Ghost encapsulated them during creation, and Cairngorm became in the truest sense, an inclusion as it's described in our world, not just a thought or memory like in the Hoseki no Kuni world. Cairngorm, who was sheltered from the world via Ghost, performed the most selfless things in the story and became a strong parallel to Phos, who performed the most selfish things guised in selflessness. Cairngorm after the moon became heavily materialistic as they were allowed to grow a personality of their own under the molding of Enma as they tried to physically hold on to the changes that were occurring. While Gado, if that's even the correct name, I'm waiting for volume 12 to see the official translation and potentially a translator's note about the origin of this name, we don't really know enough to form a reasonable statement about. Everything that we love about Cairngorm before the moon shapes their behavior and mannerisms after the moon. This selflessness, this altruism comes at a cost of oneself, which Ichikawa shows how destructive this can be, even when someone is trying to be helpful to others from the bottom of their heart. The line between selflessness and selfishness is so malleable, as seen between Ghost and Cairngorm. A selfless configuration of self is defined by three distinct features: interdependence, where you hold a strong connectedness between the self and others; outsider phenomenology, where the self is seen as the outsider looking in on itself; and impermanence, the flexibility of the self between experiences and contexts. While the self-centered configuration of the self has opposing defining features: independence, where you hold the self as separate from others with strong boundaries; insider phenomenology, where looking at one's experiences gives an exaggerated importance of the self; and permanence, which is a rigid and enduring sense of self over time. Cairngorm's introduction shows just how fickle this idea of self is. Chapter 37 is titled Instead. It's a representation of regret. Instead of me, Cinnabar should be happy in a role. Instead of me, Lapis got taken up. Similar to chapter 97, 60 whole chapters earlier, we see some hints to the subtext that I was talking about with the Doctor in terms of dialogue, in a more overt approach with Ghost and Cairngorm, showing that blurring of the lines. Who is talking and who is taking action at what time? When Ghost cuts out the Lunarians surrounding Phos in this shot, the white is dissipated to black, and the eyes of Ghost seem lighter on the left and a little darker on the right when they say, "No, you don't." It almost feels like Cairngorm is taking over the action, as Ghost would never move like this. The second they touch Phos's alloy, their speech bubble goes back to a thought akin to Cairngorm. What if this entire initial action was Cairngorm themselves asserting dominance? When Ghost says, "Don't act up today," this could mean that Ghost was actually the initiator all along, or Ghost okayed that initial outburst, like that movement, due to necessity, and that anything following would be critiqued heavily due to the severity of the situation. Cairngorm breaks this thought bubble again with a "behind you" that doesn't fully mask Ghost's dialogue as to kind of respect their take, as something more important should take priority: saving Phos, and this is where Cairngorm's dependability is shown. The cutting of the cloud bed of the sunspot didn't change the background, so it's safe to assume that Ghost did actually take this action in response to Cairngorm breaking the thought bubble. The next speech trick is really cool because it represents the nesting behavior that these two gems have always worked with, because either one could have initiated the first text. Cairngorm, who noticed Phos getting taken away, might have wanted to mention the lower half is important, and Ghost took response with an option. Or Ghost, who did the slash to separate Phos, might have brought it up, and Cairngorm, who had been watching this entire time, could have a proper solution to this dilemma. This perfect unison is only possible because Phos reminded them of Lapis, and they don't want to fail again. There are no orders to be given here, just meaningful back and forth between these two gems. The haha and nice, I take it as Cairngorm laughing and Ghost thinking because of the shading on the eyes and the placement of these speech bubbles. The big counter to this line of reasoning is Cairngorm freaks out when they say, "See, help is on the way." But it's not the fact that Cairngorm is the one that said that line, but more so that there's no response to the question. That emptiness is frightening because there's always been a response no matter how stupid the thought was. And I'm hoping that the anime reinforces this idea out by giving Ghost and Cairngorm the same voice actor in season 2 whenever that happens. It is going to be an emotional punch in the stomach at that start of that season. Every single reread, my interpretation of my favorite moment in Hoseki no Kuni, which happens in chapter 67, with the title of the gem who makes a real decision on their own accord for their own freedom. This is also the moment that made me really recognize any of the gems as a unique gem, especially on the first time read, since they were just kind of blurred together with all the post-anime content that I read in the manga. It was really hard to distinguish these side characters that I frankly didn't care about outside of Fos, but this right here, it hits. Maybe there's no separation between Ghost and Cairngorm, and that they were all one entity, but chapter 96 kind of confirmed that there is enough separate inclusions to create two distinct Lunarians, and that self-harming tendency of Cairngorm and Ghost that was not taken as a selfless act like when giving their head up to Fos some 20 chapters prior. Here it is for their own peace, and that's why it's so emotionally resonant with me. The context is a little different now because of the lack of interactions in chapter 96 and the general apathy of the lunar gem solidified the notion that what Cairngorm felt here on the moon in chapter 67 was in fact a delusion, and a really strong one, similar to how the other lunar gems that Fos hallucinated about throughout the story, like Antarcticite. There's a huge disconnect between reality and what's going on in the gem's head. Just as Antarcticite didn't really care enough, though the Antart that Fos remembered had very negative thoughts to say about Fos, the real Ghost couldn't care less, and Cairngorm's chance for freedom by Enma's wording caused this reoccurrence of self-harm. From chapter 67, you can see the setup for the composition in regards to the arm. When Cairngorm enters, the room is divided into halves of light and darkness. When Cairngorm steps on Cicada, their right arm, which still has that true real black luster, is shaded as such. Cairngorm doesn't really know what marriage is. They don't know what a wife is. They don't know what a child is. But if Enma says so, they will follow along because Enma has given them everything they could ever ask for. And even though Enma's guise is very flawed, since they only gave this kind of hint and choice to Cairngorm because their role was complete in Fos's development, it's still a messed up relationship. I would love to talk more about the grooming relationship between Cairngorm and Enma, but I don't feel as confident until we get more of Enma's past revealed, so I'll hold off until we learn about this cursed feeling that Cairngorm, Fos, and Enma all experience and sympathize with. Well, if you made it to the epilogue of this video, thank you so much for listening to my short ramblings. Star AC for the amazing thumbnail. Please check out their other artwork on their Twitter. Chapter 98 livestream will be on August 25th, so this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you can make it, stop by and say hello. And I know it's not the best time for you EU folks, or I don't want to just limit it to EU, anyone else not in the US essentially. You can always get the VOD at the bottom of the channel page. Depending on the status of when chapter 99 releases, leaks are out as I'm putting up this video, I might put out a big Fos video earlier than expected. So I will see you all in the next one. Peace.